Hello, everyone, and welcome to this segment of Industry Insights by G2, which features hot takes and actionable advice from business leaders all around the world. This is a professional spotlight with Tamara Grominsky, the creator of PMM Camp, a community and newsletter for product marketing leaders. My name is Alexandra Vasquez. I am a senior content marketing specialist at G2, and I'm so excited to share this interview with you all and to speak with you today, Tamara. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited as well.
Amazing. So today, Tamara and I will be discussing her journey to creating PMM Camp, the secret to a successful product launch, and what the future looks like for product marketing. But before we get into that, how about some warm-up questions?
Sure, let's go.
Amazing. So in the theme of our newsletter, G2T, we love to start with a pretty easy one. What is your favorite beverage?
Is it terrible if I say champagne? Champagne's my favorite, but okay, more relatable. I would say definitely like iced coffee. So my go-to iced coffee order is either a vanilla sweet cream cold brew from Starbucks, and I'm Canadian, so we don't have Blue Bottle in Canada, but if I'm in the US, then I go for like the iced Nola coffee from Blue Bottle. It's amazing.
Great, great. Yeah, you're in very good company. I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that the answer for that question is almost always coffee of some sort.
I
So,
believe that.
so definitely you're in good company. So now getting a little bit more professional about it, could you tell me a little bit about your very first job?
Yeah. So my like first way that I ever made money, I actually had like a newspaper delivery route as a kid. But as an adult, my very first like adult job out of school was I was actually an editorial assistant at a publishing company. So it was magazine publishing. Worked at a company called Western Living in Vancouver Magazine. It was here in Vancouver, BC. Because I actually did my master's in publishing. So before I got into tech, I thought that I wanted to be in the publishing scene.
That's amazing. I feel like you probably have some really good stories from that newspaper route, though, I will say.
Definitely, definitely did.
Amazing. So, throughout your career, I'm sure you have some good hacks in your back pocket. So, what are some of your best time management tips?
Yeah. Three things that I like to follow. The first one is the concept of energy management. Like all of us perform better at different times of day. So I always tell people figure out what time of day you excel at certain tasks and then protect that time for those activities. And it's going to be different for everyone. The second one I live by is if it takes less than a minute, do it now. So many people let their emails build up or these little tasks build up, and then at the end of the week you feel overwhelmed. If something comes across my desk and I can do it immediately, I will. And then the third one is to time box an activity. So often, especially in a work setting, we let something take 10 hours when really we could have done good enough in two. So I always say determine exactly how much time you want to allocate to this, allocate it and do the best job you can within that time frame and don't let yourself extend it.
I love it. I love it. That's great. So now, G2 is all about reviews and software. That's kind of our big thing. So I would love to hear from you. What is some of your favorite current software in your tech stack?
Yeah, definitely. There's two that I probably couldn't live without. The first one is Notion. So I run like all of my business and all of my personal life through Notion. I love that I can integrate both, but also it feels separate. I have it all set up on my phone as well. So my little like Notion task inbox is there. And then the second one is actually Beehive. They're a newsletter software. They're like kind of on the rise, a newer player in the space, but that's where I host my newsletter, PMM Camp. And I just love it. It's so easy to use. It's fun to use. They're always shipping new features, which is amazing. So definitely couldn't run my business without that one as well.
I'm a big fan of Notion as well. So I can totally relate. Great, great product.
Yeah.
And then our last little icebreaker question. It's not all fun and games. It's not all butterflies and rainbows. What are some problems or issues at work that make you just want to throw laptop out the window?
Okay. Yeah, this one's a hard one. I think for me, the most frustrating ones are when I have to either duplicate a task or replicate data from one tool to the next. So like I try to solve for some of this with Zapier, but it's not always possible depending on the tool. And that's when it drives me crazy because I just feel like I'm wasting time and that time could be better spent on something else.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now that we're both warmed up, I say let's jump right into the meat of the conversation. And let's start at the very top, which is PMM Camp. It is
Mhm.
your current big project that you're working on. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what PMM Camp is and what inspired you to build that community.
Sure. So I'll take a step back. So I'm a career product marketer. It's what I've done my entire career as soon as I got out of publishing. And basically, I've been building and leading product marketing teams for over a decade. I was the VP of product marketing at Unbounce and then Kajabi most recently. And there's one thing I notice about being a product marketer, which is that it can be a really lonely role. There's this conversation about, are you a product person? Are you a marketer? You're often involved with all of these different teams, but you yourself are on a small team. We feel misunderstood a lot. And so I found that this only gets worse as you progress in your career. So as you move up, there's even fewer people around you, right? And because product marketing is kind of a newer function, there's not as many people doing it as, say, product management or content marketing or whatever other role you might think of in tech. And so I noticed this myself as I was kind of coming up in the industry. And I really felt like there was a gap in the space where there's a lot of content and resources out there for people who want to get into product marketing or want to kind of learn the product marketing foundations, but there wasn't anywhere where kind of senior advanced product marketers could go to learn from each other and just connect. You kind of solve that isolation loneliness problem. So that's really what PMM Camp is all about. It's a community focused business, but we have a bunch of different products. So I have my newsletter, comes out every Sunday, it's free. And then I have a private community where it's just senior product marketers, and we talk every day in there. We host events, and we're really focused on those advanced content. And then I also do workshops, events for all product marketers. So I have a day camp twice a year, which is a virtual free learning event, and really just trying to help champion the strategic product marketing approach.
That's amazing. I love it. I love the sense of community you're creating
Yeah.
in a space that it didn't really exist before. So that's really lovely.
That's it. And especially in a remote world, it's only getting aggravated. And so there really is a need for this. And yeah, it's pretty powerful.
Amazing, great. So I would love to dive into some of those topics you might be working on with your
Sure.
community. And one of them that you mentioned you feel really empowered to talk about is product launches in general. So let's cast a wide net. What are some of in your opinion, the most important elements of a successful product launch?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because too often people just jump into like the launch tactics, which without actually thinking about how will we know if this is successful? And so I always say a successful product launch starts with a clear strategy. What are we all working towards? What would good look like at the end of this? And then there's kind of three main things or components to consider when kind of executing on that launch strategy. There's the positioning, there's the messaging, and there's alignment, let's say. So first of all, before you can jump into the tactics, you need to understand how does this new product or feature fit into the market? What makes it unique? You need to be able to answer questions like, who is this for? What problems are you solving for them? How are we packaging this value in a compelling way? Is this something that's going to be available for all customers or, only certain tiers depending on what your business looks like? And often people skip this step, especially marketers. They kind of assume the product team has this all figured out, or maybe we don't have enough time to spend on strategy. But the most successful launches really spend time on this component. And then once we understand this, then we can actually move into the messaging part. And the messaging part is where you're trying to translate the positioning that you just determined, so who it's for, why it matters, into a compelling story that will resonate with the market and resonate with your audience. And so this is when you can actually start working on things like the value proposition, the features and benefits, gathering that social proof. If maybe you have like a small beta program running, you want some quotes from some beta users, whatever it might be. And then the last component of a successful launch is, let's call it enablement or alignment, because we need to make sure that both internally and externally things are aligned. So internally, all teams need to be on the same page. They need to be singing from the same songbook, which is why that messaging kind of second step is so important. But externally, it needs to feel fully aligned for the customer. We have all these different teams working on launch, and sometimes it can feel really disjointed. But from the customer perspective, we want it to feel like one campaign that was created by one person from the beginning all the way to the end. And if you're kind of able to execute on this recipe, then I think you have a pretty good shot of having an effective product launch.
Yeah, that's great. And that's actually a perfect segue to my next question,
Yeah.
which focuses a little bit more on that internal part. Now, you stressed that this is obviously a really important area that needs to work very smoothly together. So let's get a little more detailed there. What teams or roles do you think should be involved in the launch process, and how can the leaders of the process, the product marketers, make sure that effective collaboration is happening there?
Yeah. I am going to say that this really does vary depending on your go-to-market motion, because if you're a product-led company, you might not even have a sales team, or if you're an enterprise-led company, then maybe the sales team may be more involved. But generally speaking, launch is a cross-functional activity, and it will include, of course, product marketing, but the product team, maybe engineering, if it is a very technical product, sometimes. So maybe like the tech lead, sales, customer success, and the rest of marketing. Sometimes we think of product marketing being like the representation for marketing, but it's not true, right? There's a bunch of different teams on marketing that need to be there. Some companies will have an integrated campaign manager, and that's the perfect representative for that type of launch team. But if you don't have an integrated campaign manager, then you might actually have a few folks from marketing representing in the launch team. And I think obviously that becomes a lot to handle because everyone has different expectations of what is expected of them based on maybe where they've worked before or how they've launched products before. And so I think one of the best ways to kind of foster this collaboration is just through clarity. And so I always start by aligning on a RACI or some sort of like accountability matrix. And so everyone knows, why are they part of the launch team? What are they accountable for? And then like, what do they just need to be involved in? One of the things I see go wrong is maybe someone from the sales team is elected to be a member of the launch team and kind of represent sales, but they don't actually take what happens at that launch team back to their team. And so it's really a two-way street. And I always try to emphasize this in kind of a launch kickoff. I say, hey, your job is to take the feedback from your team and bring it here to this launch team, but also take what you're learning and deciding in this launch team and bring that back to your team. And so it's kind of like a two-way feedback loop. That's really important. And then from there, it's just again about like clarity of how often are we going to meet? When are we going to meet? So I always like to do a kickoff meeting. Then I'll have like a recurring launch team meeting that's in the calendar up until the point of launch. So everyone knows what to expect. Shared documents and artifacts. So like a go-to-market plan that has everything else linked out from that main artifact. It's really just about there being one place where everyone can go to get anything related to launch.
Amazing. Yeah, I think creating that really strong communication foundation is probably really helpful
Yeah.
when, I mean, I feel like that's the make or break all the way at the beginning, whether the whole launch is even going to go well.
That's it. And I think also being clear about what decisions people will be involved in or will not be, because that's where sometimes the tension can come up. Someone might think that, oh, well, I actually get a say in what the pricing of this is, or I actually get a say in what the final value proposition is, or which channels we're going to prefer or prioritize. And so I like to be explicitly clear about decisions that have already been made that are not up for discussion with this group. Or, if there is a decision to be made with the group, who actually has the final call? Because that is where things can break down. It's not group decisions. Everyone does own certain things. And so it's good to be clear about that.
I bet.
Yeah.
And I bet you learned that from experience, but we
I
don't have
have.
to dive in too deep on that.
Yeah. Politics
Um,
are real, right?
It's true. It's true. So let's talk a little bit more about the product marketer and their role in the product launch. I mean, it says it in the name. This is their bread and butter. And like you've mentioned here, they kind of create that bridge of communication between the teams. But if we're getting more specific on the role of the product marketer, how do you see that role and that the responsibilities of that role evolving throughout the stages of a product launch?
Yeah, I love that you've touched on this concept of evolving because I think that's a really important concept for us to understand. A lot of the conversation around the concept of launch in the PMM space in particular is this idea of like product marketers aren't project managers, we're strategists. And then there can be a lot of tension there because at the end of the day, the launch does need to be project managed. And we don't all work at large companies with a project management office. And so I actually think it's really important to kind of untangle this. And I believe the role of a product marketer evolves throughout the process. And so What I mean by that is early on, the product marketer is wearing the strategist hat, right? They are deeply involved with the product team on market research, trying to figure out what is the opportunity. Hopefully they're embedded with that product team in discovery to really identify who are we building this for? As we mentioned earlier, what problem are we really solving? So maybe doing customer interviews, market interviews, and developing that positioning piece. But as we move closer to launch, we actually don't need a strategist that entire time. We need someone who's going to take that strategy and bring it to life. And so it's like, as you get closer to the launch day, you actually become more tactical, more executional, and that's okay. And so the next step I would say is really ensuring that the messaging is aligned and that it's communicated across all of those teams and all of those channels. And so this is where you wear your communicator hat, right? This is where you have that launch kickoff. You're making sure all the teams are jazzed. You're making sure that what the sales team is going to say is the same as what the website's going to say, making sure that you're helping teams prioritize the right channels, whether it's like email, in-app, ads, whatever it might be. And then finally, as you get towards the actual launch, this is where I kind of say your collaborator hat comes on. I'm putting my imaginary hats on, but your collaborator hat goes on because now you're almost like an air traffic controller, right? All of these other teams are focused on their projects. So, the paid ad team is making sure their ads look the best, have the best messages are going to work. The website team's working on the website. Sales is working on the pitch deck. Your job is to make sure all of those things make sense together, right? That all of those things are going to be done in time, that there's no dependencies that you're not looking out for. And so it is a lot of coordination, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're not a strategist. It just means this is the role you need to play to get that strategy to come to life. And then I would say there is one final hat, which is kind of like the analyst hat. So after launch, so often we think that launch ends on launch day, but launch is not a point in time. It happens before and after a release. And so after you've launched everything, well, how did we do? We need to actually measure the results. We need to measure the results in aggregate, not just channel by channel. And so gathering feedback, making sure that we're adjusting this campaign and then learning for future campaigns. And so I guess I think there's kind of like 4 roles that a product marketer plays. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. I will say the hat visual was helpful for sure. But no, that's a great way to kind of outline how that role changes so much throughout the process and how product marketers need to be so multifaceted in order to mold into whatever is needed at each stage.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think also just accepting that it's okay that at some points I am going to be more tactical than at other points, right? I don't need to just always be doing strategy to be a good product marketer.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, you've said a lot of them. So this question might be a little repetitive, but I definitely want to highlight your expertise as a coach in the product marketing space. And I would love to hear from you when you're doing your coaching, what kind of strategies or lessons that you prioritize sharing with the people that you're coaching, with the product marketers.
Yeah, there's a few. I actually think it is good to highlight them. The first one, and we did hint at this, but it's aligning on a shared definition of success early. This is where I see a lot of launches break down for product marketers because maybe the CMO has a different expectation of what good looks like than the CEO, than the CPO, than the head of sales, than the marketing director. And so your role as a product marketer is kind of to work with the product manager as a team to really identify what is the one goal. Like if this one thing happened, this would be successful. And then socialize that with your stakeholders and make sure that if the CMO, for example, is not aligned with that, you know that before you've even built out the whole plan, right? And sometimes you might have to have a definition of success that you disagree with, but that's actually how the company views the definition of success. So that's number one. Number two is before you even start to launch anything, build a shared definition of a tiering system. And so, how will we prioritize launches? Is this a tier 1, a tier 4? How do we treat tier 1s versus a tier 4? This removes all of the subjectivity because the product manager is always going to think that their product's amazing. They've spent so much time building it. The marketing team's always going to push back because they don't have capacity. The CEO loves everything that comes out. We need to tell everyone in the world. And so having a bit of a framework really simplifies this because it just makes everything objective. You're like, well, we already agreed on this. So if we just look objectively at the guidelines, where would this fall? And it doesn't mean you can't adjust it, but it's a good starting point for that conversation. The third one is to map the customer journey. Again, we talked about this, but so often as subject matter experts, we get so deep into being like, how do I build the best web page? Or how do I build the best in-app message or the best ads? But like, what is this actually going to feel like for the customer or a prospect? I use the word customer synonymously. And actually go through the journey. So as a product marketer, I like to map out the whole life cycle for this launch campaign and review the assets in order with my final stakeholder. So I'll be like, what's the first thing that this customer is going to experience? And I'll do it from the customer view, the prospect view, whatever different kind of ways into the campaign there are, and actually think like, does that message make sense to come next? Is there a gap here? Wow, that doesn't make sense that we're sending them to that location. And so that is going to really elevate your campaigns. And then finally, prioritize ruthlessly. You're always going to want to do more than you probably have time, resources, bandwidth to do. And your job as a product marketer is to make those hard decisions. And so sometimes it means cutting one team's kind of project from the launch plan, but this is your responsibility. And I think we can be afraid of like, well, we don't want to be seen as mean, or we want everyone to be able to contribute, but like your job is to do the prioritization. So at the end of the day, you need to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really amazing pieces of advice, really important things to think on before heading into the beast that is a product launch. And that leads me to our last question. Now, it would be silly of me to not talk about what's on everybody's mind, which is AI. And some people might not think of product marketing being heavily affected by AI, but it's really touching every aspect of business. So I'd love to hear from you how you see AI influencing product marketing and product launches specifically, and what opportunities or challenges you see coming from that for PMM leaders in the future.
Yeah, I think from like a launch first perspective, a couple ones. The first one is I think the opportunity is the ability to personalize at scale. So when we think about launch campaigns, we know that like the more specific the message, the better it will perform. This is just true about marketing. And today that would mean that we would have to create a lot of different versions of launch assets, of ads, of whatever it might be. And the AI is just making that so much easier. So we're not having to like manually craft every piece of content for launch. So that's one. The second thing I'm seeing with launch is a lot of PMMs using AI to get, a first draft of that messaging framework and even a first draft of some of the marketing assets. And so kind of putting in that positioning document that we talked about early on into AI, asking that to kind of present to you a first draft of like, how might we market this from a messaging perspective? It's never good enough right away. But again, it solves that blank page kind of challenge, right? And honestly, I've had some good success of then taking a positioning framework, messaging framework, and asking it to create a first draft of assets and them being pretty good on a first attempt. I think if we go beyond launch or even components of launch, there are other things like data collection. So as a product marketer, we're heavily involved in research. And I think that's one thing that a lot of like other marketers or other people in tech don't realize is such a heavy component of product marketing. But we need to collect competitive insights. And let's say you have 5, 10 core competitors, they're constantly changing things. They're updating their website, their pricing, they're shipping content, press releases. And so staying on top of that, aggregating that, surfacing insights and trends across all of that. AI is now being built into a lot of the tools like Clue, for example, where they'll actually monitor all of that for you. And so I think that is another core area where we're seeing it being kind of incorporated early, but I think we're going to see even more.
Yeah, so that wraps up our professional spotlight with the creator of PMM Camp, Tamara Grominsky. For more industry insights content like this, please visit our blog at learn.chitu.com/tag/industry-insights. See you next time, and thank you so much again, Tamara.
Thanks so much. This was so fun.